Okay, welcome to another edition of RSG Live at the Lounge. And, as we've been doing throughout these series of talks, we brought all kinds of interesting people to you. But I thought it was appropriate, given that we're in Women's History Month, but just in general, when you think about RSG, it's kind of crazy because we do think about the intersectionality in sports, and we do talk about a number of the issues that we're going to talk about today. And I realized that it's important to have these voices in the space when we have these conversations. And I've been fortunate enough to just have some good people in my life. And so one of my good friends decided that agreed to be able to come on with me. And I want to share her talents with you because I think she has a lot of good things to say. And so we had the pleasure of having my good friend, Kayla Gross with us today. How you doing, Kayla?
Hi, I'm good. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Now, for y'all need to know, Kayla has an incredible experience because she's been involved in intercollegiate athletics in some really interesting spaces. And I think about also how her research may have been informed by those spaces. And so part of Kayla, I wanted her to do before we started, how I always do these interviews, is there's always an origin to getting into those spaces. People just don't end up. Something just happens. It doesn't happen that way. There's something that happens that allows for you in the spaces. So, Kayla, I'd like to start out by just having you talk about your journey to the world of intercollegiate athletics and in some of those spaces where you've been, where you were, working with football and working with and doing some incredible work in those spaces where you don't often see women being represented. How did that pathway come about? How did you get to that space?
Sure. My introduction to intercollegiate athletics actually came as an undergraduate student at the University of Wisconsin. It was my first student job was with guest services. So staffing games as a student, just being accessible and answering questions for fans. I am not particularly athletic. I'm 5'6" and rather uncoordinated, but my parents both played D2 college sports. My dad coached for a bit. So very athletic family, I was not gifted with that talent, but I loved sport. And I saw in my own family how it brought us together. And working in the guest services, I realized pretty quickly that it is a connective thread for many. And outside of that job, I was in the journalism school, the school of majoring in strategic communications. And at that point, corporate social responsibility was becoming the big thing. And so every corporation was coming out with it. Most of the pro teams had it, but it was still pretty non-existent at the NCAA level. And so I elected, it's crazy to think about now that I just chose to do this, but I did 3 30-page research theses sponsored by, professors in the journalism school. And one of them looked at what is corporate social responsibility? What does it actually achieve? I looked at how can it be applied most effectively within the context of the NCAA. And then probably the coolest, I'm a Minnesota native. And so I got to go back for a summer and look at the Minnesota Twins and the Minnesota Vikings. They were both vying for new stadiums at the time, dating myself a little.
Wow.
And I was able to look at how their corporate social responsibility efforts shaped their ability to kind of use public input and sway to gain their new stadiums or venues rather.
Yes.
And so armed with all this research, I went to who became my supervisor with the Badgers and said, hey, I'm finding this. I think we can do better. And so they started out making me a student internship. And we unveiled Badgers Give Back, would have been my junior year of undergrad. And so my last 2 years of undergrad, I was trying to finish school full time and building Badgers Give Back full time. And it was an incredible experience. So Badgers Give Back, for those that are unfamiliar, is the corporate social responsibility platform of the Wisconsin Badgers, and it provides student athletes with opportunities to get to know the community and to give back to causes they care about. And so my last year, they did about 280 appearances in the Wisconsin area. So it became, I think it grew a lot faster than we were expecting.
Yes.
But incredible opportunity. And through that, I got to know Coach Gary Anderson, who is the head football coach at the Wisconsin Badgers at the time. And he ended up taking a new job at Oregon State. And they had a unique model where a donor gave a considerable gift every year to fund a position on the football staff, but within that role, developing a program for the personal and professional competencies of student athletes. And so Coach Anderson saw that I had built Badgers Give Back from the ground up and said, hey, we have this funding. I have this position. Would you like to come out and essentially give it a try again? And I said yes. And so I left the Badgers in 2015 and moved out to Corvallis, Oregon. And my title out there became Director of Beyond Football. And I was in that role for about 3 years on the football coaching staff, but responsible for everything off the field.
So when you think about that, you really bring an interesting lens into that space, because on one side, you're on this kind of communication operations side of athletics, and then you move to this football side, which is, this in-sport working side, which there are two different worlds. Like they interact, but there are two different worlds in that space. When you think about your positionality and where you were in those spaces, like what were the differences, or what were some of the things you began to notice in both those spaces? They're male dominated, I would say, probably, right? Would you say? But where did you see yourself? Where did you see what began to get you thinking about the idea of the roles of gender and leadership in those spaces based on those experiences you were having in both those sides of the aisle, sport specific as well as more of an operational side of athletics? That makes sense.
No, it does. It's a great question. And interestingly, I don't think I fully understood the role of gender until later. So I made the conscious choice to leave college sports after Gary Anderson and Oregon State decided to part ways. And so at that point, as a part of his staff, you have a choice of, would you like to remain? Would you like to resign, or would you like to potentially be hired by the new staff? And I chose to resign. And a longtime mentor of mine from undergrad, actually, Jerlando Jackson, who's a named professor at UW, I had reached out to him to just say, okay, what do I do next? And I'm so grateful in that he was able to make a graduate assistantship for me to come back to UW and work on my graduate degree. And I fully intended actually to come back and work on the work I was doing at Oregon State, because that model of having someone on the football coaching staff responsible for off-field development is becoming the norm in the Power Five. And so I intended to come back and study, how can we best equip these student athletes? What training do these folks need? Like, how can we really make this a thing? But Dr. J had known me since I was 19, and he saw the toll that my time in intercollegiate athletics had taken. And he said, I think you should spend some time with the research on women in the workplace. And frankly, at first I was like, I think I cracked the code. Like, I worked in football. Like, what?
That's what I'm trying to say. I'm like, you're in the belly of the beast.
Like, I don't know what other job you want me to get, Dr. J. I'm like, I did it. But I was like, all right, like, I'll humor you. Give it here. And it changed the game for me.
Yes.
In that so much of what I had taken personally, what I had seen as like my own personal failings, I was able to contextualize in that this isn't a me thing. Unfortunately and problematically, this is a universal women experience thing. And it gave me language to describe in many ways what had felt uncomfortable or not okay at the time. And so that is really what changed. I did the complete 180 in grad school and started studying now experiences of women in the workplace through a particular lens of women's leadership development, because what was most fascinating to me is I had participated in development programs for female leaders, and I did not encounter any of the things that I did when I actually dug into the literature. And that was problematic for me. How many other women are investing this additional time? It's a tax. Men aren't going to men's leadership programs and not getting, the really empirically rooted data on what is going on here and the evidence-based strategies for navigating it. And so it wasn't until later that I was really able to sit here and say, oh, these are some of the things I encountered. But I think there are layers. I was tremendously young To be a junior in undergrad, to be running Bachelor's Get Back, you have ageism that comes into play.
Yeah.
And so it's hard sometimes to decouple those things. I think they very much impacted my experience in an intersectional way, to be young and that close in proximity to age to the student athletes and also to female, I think put me in some difficult predicaments sometimes in terms of just by the nature of it, how I was perceived. I mean, I know, talking about Wisconsin sports, and Tom Mulhern, he has since passed away, may he rest in peace. And we had an amazing conversation after the fact. And he did apologize sincerely to me. But there was an article, it was the front page of the Wisconsin State Journal when I was still with the Badgers. And the headline was something like, Derek Watt had spent so much time with Kayla Gross over the summer, it led one observer to question if they were dating.
Wow.
By nature of me doing, my job was to accompany Derek Watt when he was out doing community service, and kudos to him, he did a ton of it. So yes, we were together a lot, but you can't tell me if I was male and if I was not so close to him in age, that headline would have ever hit the paper.
And that's, I mean, the layers of that, and then people not understanding the impact of a headline like that and what that means in that space. When you talk to peers who are in the space, obviously you're probably hearing some of those same stories. So when you think about, okay, what's the pathway forward? What are some of the things that you're beginning to unpack in your work now that are not only empowering to women? Okay, this is how we have to empower and build our own sense of agency. But what are those structural things you see that needs to happen? Because I think we see some of these same issues in other ways around ethnic identity, racial, and some other spaces. We see some of the other elements play out. Not, I don't think, to the extreme that I think we see in some of the gender equity issues, as we've noticed even just here nationally what happened with March Madness. I mean, not thinking about the resources people are going to need to have, and so my niece is down in San Antonio with her team, and they're about to play, and I'm thinking, okay, they're gonna give them everything they need. And then I find out they got a weight room that look like they're at the Motel 6, and then the men's look like it's a combine. But like even thinking about, okay, these are athletes, and this is what athletes need. So we see it at all levels. What are some of the things that you see? Are you seeing as emerging things that need to change or happen as we think about moving this work forward?
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on the role of organizations, because I think that's the biggest piece. And I think this has come out right now. There's been a lot of conversation. Sarah Everard was murdered walking home, and you see a lot of women talking about how keeping women safe is not a women's issue. And gender equity in the workplace is also not just a women's issue.
No, it's not.
And so while I do study women's leadership development, and I think for women, there is a lot we can equip them with so they are not in the same situation I was. Like, how are we recognizing these systems? How are we recognizing the role of, how our gender is impacting how we navigate our day? But outside of that, it really comes down to both organizations and even from a legal and policy standpoint. What are we doing to actually put women in positions where they can be successful? We even talk about, family leave in this country. 12 weeks of unpaid leave means that financially, most families actually cannot take advantage of FMLA. Within companies, inflexible work policies we have been shown to impede the progress of women. And so we have to look at the policy level and really where are we setting women up for success, and what can we do in terms of large scale change? And then it comes down to personal education. Not only women, but male allies play a tremendous role in advocating for women, in eradicating gender inequality. And so how are we equipping men and male allies to really be having those hard conversations? For the women's tournament, for example, that doesn't fall on one person. I guarantee there are a lot of folks who saw that imbalance and didn't say anything. So how can we make sure that they feel empowered and they know to speak up and to say, this is not okay?
Yeah. And it's interesting, someone's asking me, in a space about, in my own personal interest. And I say, it seems you have interest in these areas around, can you look at this broader context of, DEI work around this? And I said, it's all organizational change work. Mm-hmm. Today, it's all organizational change work. You can put the issue in the middle of the table. When it comes back to organizational change work, if the solution is at the organizational level, we all individually got to do work in that, but it's an organizational change work. So I think I love the way that's framing comes in, because it puts a responsibility in the proper place. It puts it in the middle in ways that you can't move away from, and also strengthens, whomever it is in terms of their sense of agency in that place as well. People have a right to be successful in these places. So, it's up to the organization to create the space for everybody to have an opportunity to be successful. So I really enjoy that. So you transitioned out, right? So you transitioned out, and now you're doing something different right now. And I know right now you're working in computer science, but you also just launched your own company, EquityU. And obviously it seems like, and this is why I always talk about, even when I talked about what's happened with Kaepernick, I said, as you find your voice, it's a developmental process. You have to test. And so a lot of times people are at different stages, and they say, well, you used to think that way, or you used to do this thing, and they don't see the evolution of someone. And as I'm listening to you, I see the building blocks. Even when you told me I just dropped this company, and I know you, we both, full disclosure, we're both talking about, Dr. J, that's my advisor for my thesis advisor. Like, we know he's going to be on the show. I haven't put him on here yet, because it's hard to schedule for something like this.
We co-star, we do it together.
We do it. Yes. But even in your description, I can see the evolution to how you got to that point, right? So now you're launching this to have a broader impact. Can you talk to people a little bit more about EquityU and like where that is and where you want it to go?
Yeah. So EquityU is really the thing I wish I would have had, is what it really boils down to. And so when I dug into the literature on women's leadership development, a lot of it, there's actually a great article that was just posted in the Academic Journal of Management. I'm misquoting that, I know, but it broke down how self-help books, the popular ones for women's literature, are very narrow in scope. And that's the truth. And there's so much nuance to how women are perceived in certain spaces. Take negotiation. So some folks say that women are less likely to speak up. And so a lot of popular women's leader advocates and gender equity experts say, speak up. Sheryl Sandberg wrote the whole claim your seat at the table notion. But in reality, there's an equally powerful body of literature that says women can face significant consequences for doing so. And unless you're telling that whole story, you're not setting women up for success. And so to me, it's the first question was, where does this literature exist? And so you look at programs like Harvard or Columbia. They have tremendous executive women's leadership programs, but they're $13,000 and $6,500 respectively, which is cost prohibitive for the vast majority of women. And generally speaking, they're focused on a they're focused very narrowly in terms of how can we get more women to ascend within the C-suite. And you're missing, the vast majority of women who are just trying to ascend within their organization to the next level in the hierarchy, right? And so to me, the next question became, how can we make this accessible for those women? Not to mention, those in-person time investments. So physically going to Harvard is also a barrier for a lot of women who don't have childcare opportunities or leave through their job. And so I founded EquityU to really bring quality, empirically rooted women's leadership development to women at a price point and at a time that works for them. And within that, so women's leadership training is rolling out first this year. I'm very excited. We're going to have online learning modules and then a virtual cohort experience for women. And then beyond that, we're also going to have learning educational opportunities available for allies and then organizations, because it's not just women who need to be doing this work. It truly has to be embedded both within male coworkers across the company, but then also at the organizational level. What policies are you putting in place? What culture are you creating? And how are you setting these women up for success?
Well, Kayla, we want to say this. I want to push this and support you. You have truly been a great friend in the journey, and even in my own intellectual journey. And what you're doing, I think, is very powerful. And it was a reason why I wanted to start with your intercollegiate athletic stuff. But I just want to just introduce you in terms of the work you're doing in computer science, which is a whole nother world, which we can always have you come back and talk about. But I really wanted to really position this conversation in the work that you're doing more broadly, and where that came from. And what I'm hoping is that our listeners will follow you and join you. So make sure we want you to share where they can get you, where they can find you, where they can get more of this information, so that we can start to push people towards something I think is very powerful.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. You can visit EquityUonline.com and follow us on social media at EquityU. And you can always connect with me at Kayla M. Gross on Twitter, or KMG at EquityUonline.com.
And this won't be the last time you come and hang with me. So we just, the conversation started. You have a great day, and thank you for being on RSG Live at the Lounge. Ladies and gentlemen, please go to realsportsguys.com. We will have this interview posted. We will have more information about EquityU there as well. We are all about supporting everything that's going on. We're going to be allies in this work as we start to push forward, because we got our own learning to do, as well as many of you out there have your own learning to do. So we all on this journey together to make this place a better place for all of us. So until next time, we're going to see you on the other side. This is Devon Wilson with Real Sports Guys in RSG Live at the Lounge. Peace.